Today we're doing web components. Again, we're going a little bit further. We want to dive into why they're good, why they're bad, why you might choose them. And we have some wonderful questions from a viewer today that we're going to go through one by one.
That's right. Robert asked a few questions on one of our previous episodes, and we're going to answer those today.
We're probably going to send them some stickers and a mug and things like that as well, just for being one of those great viewers.
Yeah, we love your questions.
Brian, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. J. It's been a while.
It has been a while. We talked last week. We went through Robert's questions. They were so good that they needed some simmering time.
Yeah. We've been meeting still, but we haven't produced something for you guys in a couple weeks. You know, life. But we're back.
I didn't get to tell you about my 4 a.m. ponderings about top-level components, but
You want to jump into that?
No,
before you forget?
We got to get into the questions. We've got 20 minutes.
So we're going to start with the questions.
Robert asks, can you elaborate on the difference between custom elements and web components? Yes, we can.
Let's go over all of them and then...
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
number two. How does development of a web component within a framework like Angular or React work? Number 3. Why wouldn't we want to develop at a higher level of abstraction if we could? And we asked Robert about that. He specifically meant if you've got Angular and that higher level of tooling and opinionated framework around UI components, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, why not use a framework?
Yeah, that's what we understood his basic question to be. And number 4, if we go this route, do we still achieve all the benefits of web components? And what was the clarification on that one?
I think this route referred to the framework.
Right. Yeah, if we go the route of a framework, do we still get all of the benefits plus the additional benefits of that framework ecosystem? All right. Number 1.
Great question.
Web components versus custom elements.
So Robert asked, can we elaborate on the difference between custom elements and web components? The first thing that comes to mind is custom elements are a part of the web component spec.
Right, and the quotes, air quotes there are important.
There are air quotes, and there is a history to the web component spec. I feel like this question deserves, you could go pretty deep.
Yeah, give the 30-second.
Okay. Google created this idea of web components, and then they created a spec.
Did you hear that? Google created this idea of web components.
And then they created a spec for the browsers to implement.
And as we know from specs to be implemented, they're not always crystal clear, and they're not always implemented as they were originally spec'd.
Right, because although they handed a spec over to the governing bodies still need to agree and review and have input and all that. There's some history there, and there's some evolution of that spec there. But the short answer is a custom element is one piece of the web component spec. And it's a really good question that I think has a really interesting history and deep dive.
A really good challenge would be see if you can find that spec. Go do some Googling, and that will give you some insight into that original spec.
Right. But in more colloquial terms, in everyday language, a web component is... Oh, I'm not even going to try on web component. But a custom element is the ability to create your own HTML tags.
Yeah. It's got to have a dash in the middle, lowercase, but it's like a div, but you made it, and it might have different behavior.
Yeah, and a web component involves a couple things, and a custom element is one of those mechanisms to implement a web component.
Yeah. Shadow DOM, templating, a few other things might be included in that. We won't get into exact. There's not a full exact, because it's just like PWA. PWA is not a spec in and of itself. It's sort of a industry term for a group of specs, like service workers, etc.
My confusion is that they moved some of the original web component spec into the HTML spec. So that's why I'm just not clear on where it's landed today, and I don't feel fully qualified to give you
It's a tough one.
an accurate answer that's going to go down in history on our channel. So,
Yeah,
we should dig into it more and do another episode about the spec. I think that would be a lot of fun.
And we'll put in the show notes a couple of the links to the original specs if we can, and like what Brian said, the new links to the HTML and DOM specs, which include some of this stuff. All right.
Question 2. I'm going to
2.
read it and you're going to answer it.
Go for it.
How does development of a web component within a framework like Angular work?
The beautiful thing about this is we get to defer some of this to the genius Rob Dotson, who is a developer advocate for...
He works at Google, right?
Yeah, he works at Google.
On the web component team or the PWA team? I'm not sure.
Web component, although it looks like he's kind of been focusing on accessibility lately. But anyway, one must ask themselves, why does Google want web components so badly? And does that represent what everybody else wants? Maybe it does. And in a lot of ways it does for where we work. So Rob Dotson made a website called Custom Elements Everywhere. It's custom-elements-everywhere. We'll put it in the show notes. Take a look. And he does a phenomenal job. In fact, let's take a look. Custom Elements Everywhere. That's not it, but this will Google it correctly.
Custom dash it,
Yeah. Fitting. And check this out.
Wait, go to the headline.
Okay, yeah. Making sure frameworks and custom elements can be best friends forever. Beer clang. It should be coffee, but... What's this? Basically, he goes through all of the major frameworks, quite a few of them. Like it just
Okay,
keeps
so
going
let's
and going.
see. Let's see what we started with here.
Yeah, first one's obviously Angular.
Is it okay? Angular,
Because Google.
Google. So we've
And-
got Angular, and then there's Angular JS.
And look at that score, 100%. And they've even written tests. Rob worked with Google. I don't know how many he wrote versus the team that he works with, but they wrote tests to put custom elements or web components inside frameworks and see how they perform.
Specifically, this is tests about interoperability of a web component within a
Right.
framework,
I keep looking here.
right?
Gotta look here. Yes. Say it again.
Specifically, this is about interoperability of web components inside a framework. So if I build a web component, can Josh go use it inside his framework that he's got on his application like Angular?
Brian, this is huge. So let's pause there for a second because there's two massive benefits, potential benefits of using custom elements or web components instead of a framework. One of those is you're not locked into the framework.
I would agree, yeah.
You're not beholden to any changes or breaks or bugs, etc., that a large framework can bring.
Uncle Bob's got a really good talk on clean architecture, and he's got some opinions about that. And one of the favorite things that he says, the framework authors do not care about you. So they're making decisions about the framework
Yeah.
and the direction it's going and the behavior it has, and they don't care about your business or your domain or if it breaks your company's application or anything. So anyways, sidetrack. That I like that talk. It's a really good one.
Number two, so not being beholden, not being locked into a framework. Number two, the ability to use those in multiple frameworks. Think of a date picker that you build in web components. You can write once, import anywhere. So you could have a component that's used in React and also used in Angular and also used in Vue and also used in everywhere. This only holds true in what we've learned recently if you're using the full spec well, which includes Shadow DOM. We'll get into that more. We'll try to come up with some demos on that, but I just wanted to give that disclaimer that this how do you say it?
Interoperability. Look at the... Sorry, finish your thought.
Requires and needs Shadow DOM to be fully interoperable.
It's interesting. Angular 1 passes all the tests too. Can we look at the tests?
Yeah. That's a good idea. Oh, this is
Basic support. So no children can display a custom element with no children. with children. So you can display a custom element with children in shadow root and pass in light DOM children. Oh, this is wonderful.
This is really cool. Highly recommend reading through all of these.
Wait, what are the headers here? Advanced support, attributes and properties. We've got events.
Oh, and that's in Headless Chrome, and this is in Headless Firefox.
Okay.
Interesting.
Oh, it's just these tests.
Yeah.
So there's not even too many.
Beautiful. But let's go look at one that's failing, like React.
Dojo, wow. Lit, I see lit, Polymer,
React is way down here. Uh-oh.
React.
Advanced tests. Let's take a look at those.
0.
So this is where you get into some big issues. And we should dive into this a little bit more. But this is a great place to start and to start thinking through. Robert, your question is phenomenal for this reason.
How does development of a web component within a framework like Angular work?
Yeah.
It depends on the framework, I guess, is the bottom line.
Yep.
It looks like it works pretty well in most frameworks except React.
There is I don't know if it's an actual pull request, but there's a heavy push from Rob Dodson and team. And I think in the official backlog for React next versions to support custom elements. So we should mention that these will probably pass in the future, but as of right now, there's definitely issues. And one quick note about that. Angular 8, Angular 7 already has the ability to export custom elements. I don't believe they use Shadow DOM, so it's not web components from Angular.
Are you sure?
And Angular, I'm almost positive. And Angular 8 is going to make that even more performant so that the bundle size of what you export for a custom element is going to be really small because of Angular Ivy rendering engine. So that's a thing to look into, especially if you're really good at Angular. Make one and export it and see what it looks like. Compare it to something else would be really interesting to see.
I'd be interested in doing a show on Angular. I haven't worked with it since Angular 1 and 2.
Robert, we're calling you.
Does he do Angular?
A little bit. Well, I think he uses Ionic or...
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that question. We're going to get through a couple more here in the next 5 minutes. Why wouldn't we want to develop at a higher level of abstraction if we could? Brian, I think you have some thoughts about this as it relates to business choices, product choices, cost versus savings, etc.
Yeah, I have some ideas. I'm famous for ideas and questions, I guess.
You're famous?
In my head. I'm a YouTube star, Mr. J. Didn't you know that? Okay. So, why wouldn't we want to develop a higher level abstraction if we could? So why wouldn't we want to develop in Angular if we could? Mm-hmm. Some of that we touched on with the interoperability of web components. If I build components in just to the spec, then I can use them in other frameworks. Maybe I have another product in my organization. Maybe the component is just a UI element and I have another project.
Yeah.
Maybe I want to publish open source components and I want to let other people use them. Maybe I want to create them and sell them.
I think it's important to talk about versioning there too. Even if your company only uses Angular, but you've got 5 different products, one's on Angular 3, 5, 7.
It'll work on Angular 1 and Angular 2+.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you've got that one component that you don't have to worry about the version of your overall platform.
Right, and that goes back to the idea that the frameworks change and they're governed by the owners of the frameworks. And if you have a successful business and it lives a long time, chances are you will change frameworks eventually, and the cost of change can be high. So that's one reason why you might not want to develop at the higher abstraction. What you do get, especially early on if you're starting something, you get a lot of leverage from a framework. They're usually designed to give you a lot of bang for your buck, low investment, high output in the beginning.
Especially for developer experience. Depending on the framework, it can be easy to get up and running and pushing out features from a developer standpoint pretty quick.
And then your product people come in and say, well, I want it to work like this. And you go, well, the framework doesn't really work like that. And then you got to just figure that out. So
And slow way down at that point.
So sometimes you do want to use a framework or a higher level abstraction, and sometimes you don't. There's layers of this. It depends. What does your system use now? What are you okay with being locked into as a technology?
Mm-hmm.
Layers of consideration could even be legal. So there's business reasons, legal, tech strategy. Thinking about business reasons from a strategic technical implementation. Again, long-term support is one thing that some businesses consider.
Manager risk aversion.
Maybe. I don't know. And then there's application reasons. Does it work well with your specific application? And then there's engineering reasons. There's different layers, and you could come up with specific reasons at each of those layers. I said reasons, but I kind of think of those as layers. Mm-hmm. So when you build a web component to the spec, you're building at the lowest building block that's interoperable and most compatible with anything else. And I think that is one of the strong points
if you do it right.
This idea. Okay, if you do it right. What does that mean?
It means a lot of things, which we're going to get into. That's a teaser.
Oh, okay.
You can do it wrong, and you can do things like not make it interoperable, even though it is a web component, or not make it search engine friendly, or make it difficult to test from an end-to-end perspective.
Okay. And if you go this route and you do build components or your program in these higher level abstractions or frameworks, Robert asks, do we still achieve all the benefits of web components?
Right. And I think we've already answered that. We definitely don't achieve the interoperability. It's a difficult word to say for me.
Interoperability.
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 With a nice microphone. You just have to do that sometimes.
Can you say interoperability, friends?
Video record yourself. Send it to us. Link it to us. We'd love to see you say interoperability.
But apart from that, apart from interoperability, what else should we say about that? All of the benefits.
I don't know. You'd kind of need to enumerate all the benefits.
Yeah.
I don't know because I haven't done it, but I heard, and you mentioned it, Angular, you can export to a component. So you
Right.
can build something in Angular in the framework and then export a component.
Which could be used by other frameworks potentially. We don't know that for sure, but we think.
I'd like to see that. I'd like to do a prototype of that on the show, maybe.
Specifically, does it use Shadow DOM? Does it encapsulate its functionality well, styles and JavaScript?
I mean, if it was a web component, it would have to, right?
Somewhat.
If it was going to pass the spec.
I'm talking mostly about the Shadow DOM part of it. Does it protect itself from style overrides?
I think that's one of the main benefits of a web component is you can build this component, and when you drop it into different contexts or different web pages, the styles don't bleed into it except for the styles that you explicitly define as like, hey, you can override these.
Something to Google. Mental note. Set the timer when you start this device. We got really lucky just then. My brain saw 20 minutes for some reason.
If you'd like to help us out, you could donate a nice camcorder for us. High definition, please.
How about a Nikon Z3?
There you go.
The new mirrorless Nikon with a wide-angle lens. That sounds like a GoFundMe that's worth putting out, Brian.
Yeah, I like it. We had a camera thing, so where were we at? I feel like I was nailing a point.
Sorry, Brian.
No, it's okay. It's not your fault.
We were exporting from Angular. We were wondering about Shadow DOM.
One of the benefits
Yes.
of web components is that it allows you to create an explicitly defined contract about what you want the greater page or application, what you want to allow it to override.
Yeah.
And I was saying, did you know there's a default set of styles? There's like a global set of styles
Yes.
that will override without being explicit. So these are common things.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and I had to Google it. I heard you and Mario talking about it the other day.
Typography and
Yep.
that type of stuff where it makes sense. You don't want to lock in everything on your web
I
component.
thought that was pretty awesome.
Because it's got to fit your brand.
Yeah, so there was only like 4 or 5 things. One of them was typography, and I don't remember the other ones. Letter spacing type of things. So yeah, go take a look at that. We are out of time, Brian, but this has been really great. We got through all of Robert's questions. Robert asked some more. We're going to try to dive into these and give some code examples in the next couple of episodes. And I'm really excited to show Open Web Components, open-wc.org. Take a look at that because it's a wonderful base of some good opinions about how to do web components, and it uses the new what's the word for not pre-released but actually released? The one
Released?
Yeah. And it uses the new actual released lit element and lit HTML, which was only released about a month ago. The 1.0 and 2.0 versions, we'll talk about why lit element came out with 2.0 instead of 1.0.
Cool.
And we'll go from there.
Awesome. Sounds fun.
Thank you, Brian, for coming.
Thanks, Mr. J. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy these shows.
Yeah. Have a great week, everybody. We'll do our best to make a video next week again. And
actually, this is going to be all Mr. J next week.
You're gone.
I am going to Codebeam.
Hmm.
So I'm going to Codebeam SF, which the Beam is a cool name for the Erlang virtual machine. And I'm going to be going to a conference that is all about Erlang and Elixir and the virtual machine and environment that it runs on.
That's a beautiful website. We are pretty lucky to be this close to San Fran because that's where all the cool conferences happen.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Thanks,
So
everybody.
it's going to be all Mr. J next week. Thank you.
Have a great week. See you soon.